Hello, my name is Mark Taylor. Welcome to the Education on File podcast network. This show is sponsored by the National Association for Primary Education. There comes a time in every person's life when you realise it's not about doing what you are told, but doing what you know is right for you. Let us take a journey of learning and discovery with the world's most successful people who are living the life of their dreams, walking through life using their inner wisdom and being of service to others. Forget exams, grades and test scores. What is your purpose? As we let go of what we think should be and learn from our elders to gain knowledge, inspiration and a true sense of who we are. What are your dreams? Does your life have meaning? Are you living a life of significance? Let's talk with today's guest. Hello, my name is Mark Taylor. Welcome back as we spend some more time together on the Learning on Fire podcast. Today I'm talking to Karin Bjerde. Hi Karin, thanks for joining me and let's explore the journey of who you are.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Can you give us a bit of an idea of where you're living, where you are in the world and the sorts of things that you're into in your professional life at the moment?
Yeah, so I would probably define myself as a global citizen. I am from Sweden originally, but I lived most of my life abroad. So I grew up in the States when I was younger, and then I went to high school in China, of all places. And then I went to university back in Sweden, and then I lived in the UK for a couple of years after that to work at an investment bank in London. But having done that a couple of years, I found myself wanting to, go back to my roots in Sweden, but also to work with something that perhaps had slightly more meaning than investment banking did. So I found myself coming back to Sweden and joining where I now work, which is a education startup company based here in Sweden called Kognity, where we're trying to radically improve learning for students through the use of technology, with most particularly our current product is an intelligent textbook that has interactive content, but also utilizes data to feed back to students on their strengths and weaknesses on their own individual learning journey, basically. And it's been a fantastic journey with it. We launched 2015 and we're now in 90 countries. So it's been a startup journey worth being on, with its challenges, of course. But it's interesting to see how life takes you in different directions versus what you might have thought when you were younger or in your early parts of your career, at least.
Absolutely. And I think what I love about this sort of combination of sort of a personal interview and the professional background as well is that for those of us listening, especially if we're still at school or we're still in the learning process or education basis, the fact that what you think the system looks like or the way that you learn can be so different depending on your outlook and what you actually come across in your experiences. And that's something which has come across a lot, especially in recent podcasts, in terms of how people have actually gone about learning. And of course, with the internet and all those things out there now, the world is your oyster, literally at your fingertips, isn't it?
It is, and I think we're very much moving from a knowledge or fact-based society to a learning society, whereby if you look back 50 years maybe, the person who had the most advantage or power even in a society was the person with the most facts and able to recall those and learn new facts as well. But that's not really the main skill anymore for many people. Of course, facts and knowledge are still going to be the base of everything, but it's much more about how do you learn new skills? How do you acquire those? How do you put them together? How are you with critical thinking? How do you work in a team? What's your ability to analyze those facts, for example? So we always talk about global competencies and how important they're going to be, but we need to shift our focus from facts to learning in a very rapid pace, because the world is changing, as we know, quicker and quicker. And so I think you're completely right about that.
Yeah, and I love the sort of the I guess it's the non-symmetry of the fact that so much of this learning we can now do on our own through sort of interactions with various programs and organizations online, and yet, like you say, some of the key skills that we also need, as well as having all of that ability, is the fact of working together and problem solving and working in groups and all the things that we also know that business are crying out for in terms of the sorts of skills they want. Like you say, not the fact-based knowledge where you can just get your smartphone out and find out almost anything you need instantaneously, but actually the skills being able to learn on your own, but then also being able to work in a community and in a team to therefore move those ideas forward.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if, our textbooks are pretty advanced, and I've met probably 600 schools around the world during my time here, and almost all the teachers ask pretty much the same question, which is, are you trying to replace me? And our answer is always, no, we're trying to make you irreplaceable, because so much of what the teacher's role has become has been drowning in sort of administration, marking, attendance. It's just not really leveraging the skills and the competency of the teacher, which in our opinion still is the most valuable resource that the school has, because they can, if their time is spent correctly, be a fantastic guide to the student, and a coach, a mentor, help the students develop these skills that we're talking about that are quite difficult for students to acquire by themselves unless they have that guidance. But so much of the schooling system now is focused on results and exams and getting into university, etc. And that trickles down to what the teachers are focusing on, and therefore the fact that the system is just not supporting students learning these skills. So that's why I also think things like extracurricular activities, working in projects, organizations, playing sports in a team, instrument, whatever it is, these are indirect ways of building those skills as well that you might not necessarily get in the current schooling setup as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. All those things are incredibly important, and I'm interested because you have so much experience with so many different schools, and also, like you say, globally, not just within the UK or Sweden. Mm-hmm. You can understand the teachers' concern about the being replaced, and like I say, once you can sort of dispel the fact that's not the case, then that sort of, I guess, brings a sigh of relief. But is there also still some kind of concern about the fact that, like you said, it's more of a coach, it's more of a mentor, it's more of a guiding light, really, rather than the more traditional sense of the teacher, like you say, imparting knowledge? And is there a little bit of a fear factor that comes across in there as well, which I think for those of us listening who are students, and that's quite an interesting thing to think about in terms of your relationship with your teacher, and the fact that they may be feeling the same sorts of things that you do as a student when you're sort of, the system is changing a little bit, but no one's quite sure where it's heading or the best path forward.
Yeah, definitely, and I think the teachers are they're not being given a fair how do I put this, a fair chance, really, because the technology is evolving so much around them, and technology has touched almost all verticals in society apart from education, really. And students are now so immersed in it and so fluent in it. We always talk about being digitally native, the generation that's coming up now. And I think we're seeing what that actually means when those two sort of generations clash, because a student is so used to going on the phone and checking a fact or learning something on YouTube. For example, 1 billion views every single day on YouTube have something to do with learning, whether it is how Kim Kardashian applies mascara, which maybe is not that relevant, to how do I fix this tire on my car. It's everything. And so it's just a very submersive relationship that students have with it. Whereas teachers, it's an extra thing. It's a new thing that they're not as well versed in or as skilled in as the students. And if you look at the traditional way a school environment is, a teacher has authority from several different aspects. But one of those aspects is that they have more knowledge than a student. And in a situation where a teacher might not feel that they have more knowledge than the student does, for example, when it comes to the use of technology, then that can be scary for a teacher as well, because they might feel that they won't have the respect of the students or similar. And I think that is the responsibility of the school management and also of education technology companies like ourselves, because what often happens is, teachers get given Chromebooks or laptops and they're told to use them, and they get 15 different logins to different programs, and they don't know what talks to what, or what is pedagogically based, or what is based on the curriculum. And then they sit there and they try to figure it out. And at the end of the day, because it's such a high workload and they want to spend their time with the students, not learning how to try to get programs to talk to each other, they say, you know what, I'm just going to go back to what I've done before, because I know that this works. And it might not be the best way of doing it, but it's what I know. And therefore, it sort of creates a vicious spiral as well when it comes to introducing technology to schools, because teachers are not giving training on it. And they just have to figure it out. So, I think that's also where school management comes in. They need to think about a holistic approach to this. What does our school want to do with technology? It's not about buying 5 VR sets and then hoping that GCSE results improve. It has to be, you have to have much more thought out purpose. And for companies like ours, we need to take responsibility and train teachers, train students on how to leverage technology and its impact.
I think that's really, really insightful, and I think that sort of community of everybody working together, which I think is a very positive one. Like I say, whether it's companies, businesses, the way the training comes about, the school management and the leaders, it is that collective. We're all working together to sort of meander our way through to see how this new looking system is, and whether we think there should be a very swift change or whether it's a very gradual change. The change is definitely happening, whether we like it or not. And I think, like I say, having guiding lights and open conversations like we're having now, I think just opens the door enough for people to say, oh yeah, I can feel the difference, I can see it, and I can also see it from both sides. And I think that sort of hand-holding, I think, is probably the most supportive way forward.
Yeah, and I think it would be amazing if a teacher got up in front of their classroom and said, "Okay, you know what? Let's flip the classroom. Let's go in, and you students have to teach me how to use this piece of technology, because then the students need to work on the skills we talked about before. So they need to collaborate. They're going to come up with a lesson plan or a 5-slide tutorial on something. So they need to think about how to work together. They need to do a project plan. They need to think about how they're going to implement it. They need to think about how they're going to communicate this in a way that the teacher understands it. So all of a sudden, you're embedding lots of skills that you wouldn't necessarily do. And at the same time, you're sort of destigmatizing or de-dramatizing the fact that the students know more about technology often, not always, but often, than teachers do. So I think if we just sort of open up and sort of let the norms or how things usually are done fall down, then I think we can do a lot of interesting things, actually.
Yeah, I think it's amazing as a thought. And one of the things I say to my children is the fact that I don't necessarily know the right answers or even know what's best for you. But what I do have is the experience of seeing lots of different things. And therefore, what we can try and create and what we can try and implement is based on that. And I think that's exactly the sort of thing we're talking about here. We know the sorts of things that the students need to learn. We know the types of skills. We know the fact that things are changing. That kind of experience is what we have as educators. But actually, the nitty-gritty of what that is and how that looks like you say, can be led by the students and can be moved around in such a way that it's very exciting for them. It's given them the skills they need. And it sounds like a very exciting idea, and I hope people embrace it more and more and more.
Yeah, I hope so too. And there's so many different things you can do with it as well. You can find 10 YouTube videos on this and figure out which ones are credible and which aren't, as an example, because then you learn about critical thinking as well and checking your facts, especially in this environment that we're in. You need to know that skill. So there's a lot of cool stuff to do.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. And if you're a student listening, I suggest that get them to listen to this podcast, and then maybe that could be your discussion point to start to see how you can take control and flip it and change it in your school or your community, wherever you're learning. So this question I'm really interested in because of your background, like I say, and all your travelling. But what does your life look like now, and how is it different from when you were growing up?
Oh, it's such a hard question to answer, because I've always when I was younger and I was living abroad, I was between 6 and 11 years old when I lived in the States. And then I came back to Sweden when I was 11 and 15, and then to China when I was 15 to 19. So I've seen 3 very different places, sort of socialist Sweden, as it's called, the very capitalist US, and funnily enough, even more capitalist China, even though it's a communist state. And so, the environment has always been that of a changing factor, which I think has shaped my life tremendously, because I think exposing yourself or being exposed to different backgrounds, to different cultures, to different types of states or governments, to different religions, cultures, languages, everything like that, it just forces you to become a more well-rounded, I would say, but also open-minded person, which I realize now is one of the greatest strengths I have, because and you don't, it's so hard to quantify that or put a value on it. But my ability now to see the big picture and to identify 2 or 3 gaps, for example, I think is a direct correlation with the fact that I've been forced to be so open-minded and look at things holistically rather than narrow-mindedly. And so I think my life has taken, in that sense, a different approach because I underestimated that skill. And so I am able to now work in jobs and have friends and do hobbies that I wouldn't necessarily have thought I would have, simply because of that skill that I was underappreciating, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think it's a real gift, isn't it? Because there are lots of people when you're growing up, or you see the world through telly and the internet these days, you know there's something out there, but your experience can be very, very small based on the small town you live in, or like say your sort of community around you, and other things are happening, but your experience stays the same. And I think to have that opportunity to actually live in so many different scenarios, to, like I say, gives you all of that understanding, but also you can sort of feel that it can be different. And I hope that as these podcasts go through, people start to hear sort of that sort of correlation of how you can make that different, whether it happens to be reading some of the resources that people share, listening to the stories of everyone's backgrounds, that actually you do have the control to be able to do that yourself, no matter what your limitations. And if you're lucky enough to travel the world when you're younger and study all over the place, then you have that immediately. But also, you, like you say, you can take a little bit of control about how you then implement that in your life.
Yeah, you can. And I think just because I saw lots of people in my environment when I was growing up like that who didn't take advantage of it. Who just chose to stay with the same people or same type of people or same people from the same nationality. And I think that's quite human nature in the sense, if you look at sort of human needs, one of the most important or the most prevalent needs is that of security and sort of predictability. The fact that we feel comfortable when we sort of know what's happening. And I myself do that all the time as well. And I don't necessarily, it takes me a while to push my boundaries sometimes, etc. But if I sort of can give a piece of advice, what I'm trying to learn and work with every day is to take active ownership of pushing yourself, because it is really scary not to be surrounded by exactly the same people who think like you and might disagree with you, or think that your views are not what their views are, or might have done things differently. But it's only like that you will grow, and it's when you start to see that you're growing that it becomes super inspiring to grow even more. And so I think it's about, even if you're in just a small town somewhere, you can still have that experience even though you are still in that town. It all comes down to how you approach it. And if you sort of approach life with a learning mindset, and also work, which I've had to do a lot in my life, work with sort of controlling your ego. And I think ego is one of those things that our society at the moment it's going a bit out of control because of social media and how everything's being measured and controlled and compared and everything like that. I think the ability to work with one's ego and lose the importance of ego is one of the most important skills you can have. And I think those two are very tightly correlated, being able to sort of lose your ego versus and having a learning mindset and challenging yourself and putting yourself in new environments. Those two are very highly linked, I would say. So that's something I work with and still struggle with every day.
Yeah, like I say, I think those things they're an ongoing awareness, aren't they? And I think just that's why I love these conversations, because it just suddenly broadens your whole concept of what you're trying to do, what you're trying to learn, the fact that we are growing and you have a choice about how that goes. And I just find that very, very exciting.
Yeah.
What was valuable about your school experience?
I really liked school. It was it was highs and lows, as it always is. I came to a point during my high school where I let the stress get the better of me, and I basically had to take a month or two off to recuperate because I sort of hit the infamous wall. But once I learned to structure things differently and approach it in a different way, then school became super enjoyable. And I would say that, so I studied the International Baccalaureate, which is the international equivalent of the A levels, basically. And it's a program that you study all around the world. And it just gives you an extremely global mindset and a broad mindset. And that was absolutely life defining for me, and school in general is life defining because it's an environment where you have the privilege of just learning. And I think those times become so fleeting, when you're a bit older, like I am now. I just turned 34 2 days ago. And when you're a bit older, I realize that even though I'm learning, it's in a lot less structured way. And my learning, even though I'm still doing it, it's definitely tapered off versus the levels I was doing when you were in school, where your brain was just a sponge and you were able to absorb and take in new information and apply it in a completely different way. And I'm sort of sad that the way our society is structured, learning is not something that comes automatically. And it's not something that we always talk about, lifelong learning, but what does that actually mean? Most stop actually learning in a sort of active way when they graduate from A levels or university, if you go on to that. And I think that's one of the biggest shames, because you just miss, or I at least miss, that learning environment where the only purpose for you is to learn. When you get into work scenarios, et cetera, it's a lot more about learning to achieve something else, whereas in school it's about learning.
Yeah, and I think those conversations are really important, aren't they? Because I have when I'm teaching music, and I've got some music students who are going to music college and that kind of thing, and one of the things I remember from looking back to when I was there was the fact that it's the only time when you've got the amount of structure, the amount of facilities, the amount of immediateness of everything happening around you, almost in your entire professional life, because as you then sort of graduate and then you have to earn a living and then you might have a family and your time structures and your focuses start to change, you never get that time back where your whole world is sort of immersed in this wonderful world of study and learning in whatever your passion happens to be. And I find it a really interesting concept, of course, because it's quite hard to get that across to someone younger when they're just in the middle of it, but that experience of seeing it in hindsight is something which I think is really important to try and get across, and I'm still never quite sure whether how I've managed that.
No, and I agree, and I think it's so sad that that's where we are in society, that it's like that. But I completely agree, and I also think it's really sad that when you're in it, like I said, I almost burnt out and couldn't sort of complete school, but I did. But it's sad that the way that schooling is structured at the moment. There's a reason we say that schools. Or there's a saying, at least, that schools kill creativity, and it's because we've structured it in a sort of very industrial way, whereby you need to learn to get grades, to get into university, to get a job. That's sort of the pecking order of learning, whereas learning is at the sort of bottom of that to achieve something else. And I always just think about, and we try to push for, how can we create or design a learning environment in school that's much more about the actual learning, and think that the results or outcomes or things like that will come by itself at a later stage. I think you sort of remove a bit of the charm with learning by having it so grade focused and results focused and sort of next step focused in school. So to all the students that are listening, I completely feel the fact that you're overwhelmed probably with all the work and exams, etc. And I just hope you can take a minute every now and then to enjoy the experience for what it is, without being too afraid about the end results, because at the end of the day, things will work out. And that's one of the things I wish that I had known when I was younger. And I probably will be saying this about myself today in 5 years' time, because every age has its own worries. But life has a tendency to work itself out. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply yourself and work hard and do the best you can and live a life of passion. But at the end of the day, you can't really control the outcome as much as you think you can. And you definitely can't control the future. And you probably will spend more time worrying about it than is warranted. At least I've done that. And I think it's human nature to do that. And what we think is what we become. So I wish that I would have taken my study years to enjoy learning more and be confident that that in itself would lead to some great future, which it has, but I didn't know that then.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always just think back to the toddler trying to walk, and it's that kind of, there's no structure there. You don't decide when that's going to be. You don't put a framework in place. There's just an innate idea and understanding that this is something that will happen, and you can see it when you see a toddler trying to walk. And I just think if we can just harness the essence of knowing that's true within the education system, then the whole thing would just change overnight. But like I say, it's an interesting concept to allow that kind of natural learning to happen within that understanding of how we can do it. And as we almost go full circle with that, the fact that as experienced people, we know that we can create an environment to give them that freedom. We wouldn't put our child in the road to learn. We'd put them in a safe environment, but we don't then teach them how to walk and how to do those things. And it's a very interesting.
Think that there are a lot of things that are going to happen in society that will change. The rise of gig workers, so people who don't really work for a corporation but work for themselves as a consultancy or similar. Also, the fact that some of the more advanced companies want to come in this field, especially a lot of the tech companies, they're starting to hire not based on where you went to university, but rather what skills do you have. And I think those are two quite important changes, because hopefully, I personally think that one of the most limiting factors in changing education is that universities have so much power when it comes to saying that a person is skilled or not. That it's sort of, and that's what creates the whole value chain. That, okay, we want to get a great job. That means you have to go to one of these 15 universities. And to get into those, you have to have these grades. And to get that, you need to do that in A-levels. To do that, you need to do that in GCSE. And then we're down to the fact that you need to basically, when you're born, be registered to the right preschool or whatever it is. And I just find that insane.
Yeah.
And what if that social structure starts to change? What if in the future, 50% of everyone is forecasted to work with a gig economy, but work for themselves? That all of a sudden it becomes much more about what skills can you demonstrate versus do you have a degree or not. Same thing with corporations. If companies like ours starts to hire not based on where you went to university, but rather can you pass this test that we have, which is skills based, then the whole structure will change. And I think that's something that today's students should be very welcoming towards, and also keep in mind that having good grades will not necessarily get you the same type of position that you did before, or sort of guarantee your future in the same way it did probably when our parents were growing up, because it's a different world out there. Once again, we come down to the fact it's not about facts or how much you can repeat, but rather how much can you learn and how can you apply that. And if you can demonstrate that in different parts of your life, I think you'll be very well placed to get jobs or to get opportunities in this new modern world that we're living in.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think also that's an exciting thing to listen to, and a kind of a real expanse, and I would say it's like a growth mindset. The fact that anything's possible based on those things, and so hopefully all of us listening to those sorts of wisdom there, you can sort of sense that I can see my life taking shape in some form or another, just by the feeling of what that's like I say, rather than the heavy burden of kind of, if I don't get an A next week, then that's it, my career is over before I've even started. And I think that also, in that sort of more social sense, changes the way that we are from a mental health point of view and how we feel about learning, and then all that's got a positive reaction to it.
Yeah, and I think, but don't get me wrong, it does place a lot of responsibility on the individual, because all of a sudden, if we see sort of school as it's not been a conveyor belt, but it's been very structured in terms of how you should go about things. When it comes to crafting your own skills or passions or interests, there's a lot more individual responsibility on a person when it comes to that. No one's going to tell you or force you to go get a hobby that then can become your career. But I think that's where sort of where your focus goes, your energy flows, is a saying. And I think that's so true. Just look at what are you spending your time on? What sort of makes you that a bit more excited. And if you start to find something in areas of your life where time sort of just flies by, well, then maybe that's a sign. And maybe look at investing in that. How can you continue to grow within that field? Are there opportunities in this field? And start to think about those aspects as well. Not saying they shouldn't focus on school, because of course that's super important, but I think there's so many different avenues to look at it.
Yeah, it just comes back to that whole community field, doesn't it, of organisation, businesses, parents, schools, all working in a slightly different way, but working together, which I think, yeah, it's exciting for me. I think that there's great excitement and understanding in how that can work. Are you a teacher looking for support to create and develop music in your school? We have created Primary Music on Fire, taking the fear out of teaching by giving you the step-by-step skills and ongoing support you need. If you're a homeschooling parent and would like the opportunity to learn an instrument with your child on our 5-day challenges, all of this is available through Primary Music on Fire. Go to educationonfire.com/primary-music and sign up to the newsletter. That's educationonfire.com/primary-music. Which teachers do you remember and why?
I remember the teachers who respected me at the same time pushed me because they thought I could do more. So it's highly infuriating when you think you've done a good job and you turn that piece of paper in or that project in and they say, great, this is on paper really well done, but I know you can do more. And at the time, those were very annoying. But those are the ones who make you grow. And those are the ones that respect you as well, because they respect the fact that you probably have even more skills than what you're showing. So I would encourage everyone to sort of find or identify those teachers who push you, and not in a negative way saying that you're bad, but rather in a positive way saying you can do more because you have this and this ability, or I believe in you, or I think that I've seen this in you. If you work towards it, then I think you can reach this level, or whatever it is. I think it's just a great skill for a teacher to constantly push students slightly out of their comfort zone and force them to think they can be more than they are, because often society is a limiting place. Rather, we think, oh, I can't do this because of this. I have this background, so I can't do that. I don't have the education enough to do that, or whatever it is. I mean, society is quite limiting in its beliefs, and I think if you find people, teachers especially in the younger ages, that can push you to change that mindset from I can't to I can, then I think you will benefit immensely.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and it almost reinforces what we were saying just a moment ago, isn't it? The fact that what that does is it then makes the student look inwardly and gives them a bit of responsibility within that structure, and I think that working together, I think, is really key to fulfilling everyone's potential, and I think that from a teacher's point of view as well as the student's point of view, and I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it.
And it's so much more exciting as a student, thinking that okay, I know I can do that. I'm just going to push a bit harder, and I can do that. And it's an exciting goal to achieve, rather than feeling like you're sort of just drudging along or struggling to make the bare minimum, because that is not very exciting or inspiring. But when you have people who believe in you and sort of push you to achieve it, then you want to show yourself as well that you can do it. And that's a great motivating factor. And rather than have an external motivating factor, if you find that intrinsic internal motivation, that's when things really start to happen.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Who did you admire when you were young?
My father. But that's probably quite a common thing. But he managed to combine having a great career while being a super humble, warm-hearted, family-oriented guy. And I think that that's quite rare. So he definitely inspired me to want to be the same in terms of both having a good career and applying myself, but also not losing sight of core values, and not losing sight of treating people with respect and having a smile on your face and not letting sort of the stress of work or life get you down. And he always says a brilliant thing. He says, whenever I start to worry about something, or I ask him if he's worrying about something, for example, now, a classic example, last week, he had to have a mole removed, and they need to test it to see if it's something dangerous or not. And I asked him, oh, are you not worried? What's going to happen? What if it comes back wrong? And he's like, I have no worries in the world. Why would I worry about something I can't control? And so he's happy camper right now. And he says, if we get the results and they're negative, then I'll start to worry. But there's no point in doing it now. And that's such an important skill, because so much of our mind is wrapped up in trying to predict negative outcomes and prevent them. And most of the time, those don't happen. I was given a great exercise to do a couple of years ago on this exact thing, whereby every day that's a worry comes up. Oh, what if this doesn't happen? Or what if that person doesn't come? Or what if that result isn't good enough? Whatever. All these things you had just going around in your head. I was asked to write them down. And then these were the major worries I had that day. And then 2 weeks later, I was asked to go back and look at them. 9 out of 10 of them didn't happen. And the one that did happen wasn't as big of a worry as my mind had made it up to be. So what I'm trying to learn on that is there's no point in worrying about things that might or might not happen. Just focus on what you can control today. That's the only thing you can work on. And then the rest will come.
I think that's right, and I think also the positivity in that as well probably mitigates the chance of anything bad happening as well. Like I say, I mean, you don't know the future, you don't know how things are going to be, but I think that mindset and that feeling that everything's going to happen for the best, or it's working for you, just changes the whole dynamic of how you show up in the world, and that just makes such a big difference in the outcomes, like you say, on a daily basis when you're thinking about all of those things.
Yeah.
What was the best piece of advice you've ever been given, and who gave it to you?
So apart from that we just talked about, I think the best piece of advice that I've been given recently is from a seminar I attended last week in London, which was with Tony Robbins, who some people might know from the Netflix documentary I'm Not Your Guru, but he's basically a life coach, I would say, who is just super inspiring and empowering to listen to. So I definitely recommend him to anyone who's interested in sort of personal growth. But he just constantly reinforces the fact that your brain is so tremendously powerful, and we have the ability to use it much more than we are, because the brain cannot tell the difference between what we think or imagine or believe versus what reality is, speaking of what we just talked about. Yeah. So the exercise he did with us was, imagine, so there was 12,000 people in the room, and he had us all close our eyes. And you guys can do this now as well, but close your eyes and imagine that you have a lemon in your hand. And you take this lemon and you put it to your mouth, and maybe just lick it a bit in the beginning. And now imagine that you're taking the lemon in your mouth and you're biting into it, and the juices start to flow around in your mouth. And then you take an even bigger bite of the lemon and you start to chew it maybe, and you feel the lemon really just filling your mouth. Now, how many people are salivating right now? And I'm salivating talking about it. And this is probably the 5th time I do this exercise. And in that room, 12,000 people's hands went up. But no one was holding a lemon, and yet everyone was salivating. And the reason he did that was just to get us to realize that the brain believes what we tell it. And if you can start to leverage your mind in a positive way, in an empowering way, in a believing way, then what you can accomplish is so much bigger and so much more than you think is possible, because you're tricking it in a positive way rather than the standard, which is tricking it in a negative way. So that's the best piece of advice I've gotten, that to start to really critically examine your thoughts and how limiting your thoughts are often, and thinking that you're not good enough or things like that, which is something I've done for a long time in my life, and changing that. And if you start to change it, you start to believe it. If you believe it, then it becomes a reality. And therefore, you can all of a sudden achieve things you thought were impossible just a couple of weeks or months ago, just by changing what you're thinking.
Yeah, And like I say, I mean, almost everyone listening is gonna, you can taste that lemon
Yeah.
just by having listened to you talk about that. And I think for me certainly as well was the fact that you can feel the power of that. Or now I'm very aware of exactly what I'm thinking in that moment, and it
Yes.
opens the door to, but what am I thinking when I'm not thinking about it? And like you say, those negative thoughts, you then see them for what they are, and you can understand it. You're reinforcing all that negativity possibly as well as the positivity, and actually just being aware of exactly where you are in your thoughts and what you do believe about yourself. And then you think, and now the world really is my oyster, because I can make that change because I'm
Yeah.
just aware of it, and I can make that difference in my own life.
And it's hard. It's super hard because our brain is still, we've gone through years and years and years of evolution, but our brain is virtually unchanged versus what it was when we were hunters in the savannah many, many hundreds and thousands of years ago, whereby we always had to be on constant alert to see if there was an animal going to attack us soon. So we were constantly living in this period of stress and anxiety of survival, but we're no longer in that. No animal has attacked me as far as I know, and I don't think there's a risk when I leave work today that I'll be attacked. But yet our brain is wired like that, to constantly anticipate the fear and anticipate what could go wrong. And that's what we need to try to actively take control over.
And what advice would you give your younger self?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about it, but trusting and belief that life will work out in whatever way possible, or in whatever way is right for you. There's been so many periods of my life where I thought, well, especially in areas of life where it's easy to compare. And we've touched upon many of those, but how good your grades are, how quickly you got your first job, how quickly you get married, how quickly you have children, how much money you're making, how big your house is, how much did your watch cost. All those things that are just, in a sense, absolute and relative at the same time, are just because something is good for one person does not mean it's good for you. And just because you see one path to what you think is happiness does not mean that it will make you happy. And something I was told is, if you look at often what we do, we look at something else or someone else and we build up a mental image of that person's life must be perfect when they're on holiday in some fancy place that you want to be, and you think about all the great ways that their life is perfect versus yours. And what I was taught to do is say, okay, but you can't just switch one part of your life. Look at the holistic aspect. Would you want to, so say you're envious of your friend's, vacation that they're taking. Would you want to change your entire life with that person? So take on all the things that they have that are good, but also all the things they have in their life that are not so good. And when I started doing that exercise, I realized most of the time I was pretty happy with the life I was leading. Because yes, there are of course things that I wish I had more of, or I could do better, or things like that. But when I looked at the life I was leading holistically, there were actually very, very, very few people in the world that I wanted to change life with. And that became quite a comforting fact for me, that I'm on the path that I'm supposed to be. And the aspects that I want to improve or change, I have the power to do that. But to sort of be accepting and mindful of the path that I'm on, and that's the right one for me, and trusting that things will come in the right time and in the right way to suit my life. And not then forgetting your own responsibility in it, but trusting that another person's path is not necessarily the right one for you.
Yeah, I think that's really, really key and really, really important. And the thing I like that you just touched on there towards the end was the fact that the timing of it and how it works out is something which is so crucial. And I personally find myself being quite impatient about lots of things, and just being able to take a deep enough breath or step back enough to actually see the bigger picture, to think, now. And I guess that comes with experience as well, doesn't it? When you can sort of see around it, and some of the things that you thought didn't happen that you should have done, or a negative experience which turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to you, is just something is really key to understand.
It is, yeah. And I think one other thing that Tony Robbins said a lot was, his life sort of motto is to take the worst day of your life, or what you think is the worst day of your life, and make it the best day. So things that happen to you are actually happening for you. Imagine that life is happening to you, that everything that you perceive as negative or going against you or whatever it is actually something that you can change and turn into something positive if you learn from it, if you grow from it, if you apply from it. So that's what I try to do. That I try to be sort of appreciative of everything that life throws at me or to me, because then you can never control what happens to you. It's completely impossible. The only thing you can control is your reaction to it. And so if you focus on that instead, and like you said, making your worst day your best day and turning that into an advantage, then you will get far more fulfillment in your life, and you'll probably get further as well when it comes to goals or whatever it is, if you have that mindset versus one of thinking that life is against you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I couldn't agree more. What does your future look like?
So hopefully I continue working with Kognity and the mission we're on with education for many years to come. Personally, I'm on a journey to really embrace all those things I'm talking about. It's of course easy for me to sit here and talk about being grateful and working with my thoughts, but it's so easy to slip back into old habits. So I'm actively trying to really change parts of my life in which I often fall into old habits or old styles of thinking. So I think that's a lifelong journey, and it's one that I'm quite excited about because the potential is, I think, huge. But I think the future, so I have not set up any really clear goals or anything like that in the future. My goal is in the future that I want to have for myself is one where I am able to implement all those things we talked about today. So having that learning mindset and having life be happening for me, not to me, and being able to approach it with the power of the thought really well harnessed, and therefore being my help and my guide rather than my hindrance. So that's what the future holds for me, I'm hoping, but it will take a lot of work to make sure it's in place.
And what podcast, book, film, video, song, or any resource has had the biggest impact on you, and why was that?
So, I'm going to talk about him again, but Tony Robbins has a great podcast that I listen to quite a lot where he touches on a lot of things that I've talked about today. So I listen to that quite a lot. I listen to a lot of other personal growth podcasts and resources and read books. So people like Tim Ferriss has a great podcast and also a couple of great books. He's written 4-Hour Workweek, for example, and Tools of Titans, where he's interviewed lots and lots of successful people to try to distill their habits into sort of bite-sized format. So I listen to a lot of those things that have to do with personal growth because that is only your responsibility. And I find it very hard to work with otherwise unless I'm having that coach or mentor through the podcast format. And apart from that, I also do and listen to a lot of things when it comes to yoga and meditation, whereby I just find that to be a good forum to clear your thoughts in your head and sort of ground yourself again, and especially working with your ego that we touched upon before. But I think that finding places where you can balance out your ego a bit, and for me that is podcasts about yoga or doing yoga even, is a very useful resource for me.
And what I love of this entire conversation is that, we started talking about an ed tech company essentially, providing things, but to hear the story and the life understanding and the work that you're doing within an organization like that, and then just seeing how that's filtering through into the sorts of products and the sorts of way that you're able to influence education, I think is such a wonderful thing to hear. And I think the positivity that comes out of all of those things and the fact that we can share it and talk about it rather than it just be something which you find or you do or you implement, I think is fantastic. And that's the exciting thing for me, having created this podcast and actually chatting to everybody. But I think it just opens that whole door to the fact that, as we talked about towards the beginning, everything we learn is really important. It's not about the facts, it's the way we go about it. It's the way we find these new podcasts or new books or things that we're doing, which just opens up a whole world to us. And I think it's a really, really exciting new way of being, and to sort of communicate those things in the person as well as just sort of the online technical side as well, which is, I think it's brilliant.
I agree, and I almost see, I mean, there's so much negativity surrounding the debate with schools today about lack of resources and teachers not being happy and wanting to leave the profession, and students being under so much pressure when it comes to workload and well-being, and universities. I mean, there's so much negativity, and I rather want us to change the mindset again and think about there's so many opportunities. There's never been more opportunities in schooling than there is today. And for us to become empowered learners, we have so many more opportunities now than I had when I was in school, and especially when I compare it to my parents, for example. So I sort of try to take responsibility for bringing a positive message to education, an empowering one rather than a negative one, because I think once again, it's about mindset, and there's so many things we can do differently and positively if we all take sort of individual responsibility and open ourselves up to the opportunities. So I'm glad that that's come across today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a wonderful thing for us all to hear, and I hope everyone gets as much out of it as I have. It's been a fantastic conversation. So if people want to find out more, what's the website, what's the social that people can contact you on, or find out more about what your sort of day-to-day life is looking about?
Yeah, so you can, of course, follow the company. So it's Kognity with a K, so kognity.com, Kognity.com. So that's, of course, about the company. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can just send me a message there. I'm sure you have my full name there in the podcast bio, so just reach out there. I also have my email that you can send an email to. So I'm very open to having these conversations and seeing what people think.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and if you go to the show notes of this podcast, if you go to educationonfire.com and just write Karin in the search bar, the whole of the show notes will come up with all the links that we've been talking about, which will be incredibly interesting for you to be able to just click through and explore more. So thank you, Karin, for sharing your wisdom and allowing us to learn from your wonderful experiences.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Learning on Fire podcast. For more information, please visit educationonfire.com and follow the links from the homepage. This show is sponsored by the National Association for Primary Education. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.